Put a basic sky in, very simple, some pale blue up here, and you'll notice straight away that choice of paper is going to make is a huge thing in pastels. So you'll find this is why I like a smoother surface than lots of artists like to work on the textured side. I prefer to do something on this side, and you can see even rubbing it quite hard, you get the surface showing through. So let's now put a bit of. So that's a cerulean pale blue. This is a cobalt blue. I'm just doing a bit of a graduation here. And in fact, what I'm probably going to do on this one is I will go with the flow and I'm just smoothing it in. A little bit of rubbing at this stage is permitted. So we've done a bit of that in skies before. And I want to get some clouds into the scene, so I'm going to, having smoothed that in, I will use my just put it on the desk. Here we go. A nice blue rubber. So put a cloud in here. I could leave out a space, but sometimes it's easier to get a graduation by doing the whole thing. And you can see how easy it is just to clear back and create a gap away for clouds. So now I can go into the cloud, putting some white in here, like that. See how simple it is. If you put this white on top of the blue, it still will work, but it won't be quite as bright. So that's why you might want to clear a space. And then we can go grey here by overlapping. Actually, we can still use the darker blue with the cobalt blue, like that, and add a bit of brown to it. So if you add something like this, which is a sort of English red equivalent, a sort of pinky brown, push them together. So I've used the cobalt blue, which is a dark blue. Yeah. Same blue as up here. And mixing it with that brown. Now if you don't quite get the grey you want, you can always try different blue, which will give you a colder colour, for example, than this. This is a warm blue. Or you can try a different brown. Or you can add a grey. I mean, here is a dark grey. You might find if you've got a stormy cloud that you just go into your greys, but if you can mix it from different colours, you'll often get more interesting results. So there we are. The other colour that is very helpful to add to greys and so on is possibly a very pale yellow. So I've got this is a Naples yellow, like a buffy, very pale. That can sometimes take out if the cloud's coming up too purple. And then you can go back into the white and add little variations. And then at this stage, if you want to get fluff in your cloud, is when you can use your stump. And, sorry, I'm knocking it. So you use a stump to do this, little smudging strokes, just to connect lights and darks. And this way you won't lose detail. If you use your finger too much on the edges of clouds, you might lose the detail. So use the stump. Sometimes just flicking with the pastel works. A simple trick in pastel is when you place it, so I'd like using the Chinese brushes in watercolour. You just place it and lift it, flick it one way or the other, and you get little random broken strokes that can look very effective as clouds. Anyway, we're going to really about water today. So if I'm painting a scene like this, and in fact what I'm going to do, I'm going to combine a few different things together. So I'm going to create water down here, but not necessarily as much as that. But the point is, what you do need to do, so I'll draw what we're going to do. We're going to have a puddle here, and we're going to have a track. So I might use the same idea as in the acrylic painting that I did of the track here. So here's the acrylic painting. So let's convert this into a summary scene. And so in order to do that, I've got to do the shape of the track and get the lovely clear graduation in the colour. So I'm just going to make up the idea of a track getting wider here. And then again we bring in the blue down here, the dark blue on top, and as you go up higher you just use less of it. But the idea is to try and maintain the same balance of colour on each part of the track. And again, because we're painting a smooth wash, you can push this into the paper with your finger. As long as you don't use a finger you've used on another colour, make sure you use a nice clean finger. So we can create a track here, and why not just put another couple of bits over here, puddly bits, see if we can make them look like they're reflecting. So this is working out how to make puddles and other wet parts. I mean, we haven't got a lake like in this one. That one had a lake in here. I could put a lake in here. But what I want to do is put a tree and reflect it and just show you how the reflection will relate to the tree above. And so when you now do the landscape, and I'm only going to hint at what's going to happen, I'm not going to do the whole thing, you can put in dark bits on top of here to suggest, muddy parts like so. You can go into this and basically overlap what you've done in the first instance to create the rest of the landscape. So that will go in there, and when it comes to the grasses and such like, again, you can use little strokes like that to create texture. You can use bold strokes. Let's make it a bit more summery, so let's put some grassy colours in. So some really bright greens, like here, but even sunnier. Okay, so we've got that. And you can overlap, but what you start to do when you create texture is use the edges of the pastel as well to create grasses. There's no point, by the way, of putting that detail in there until you've got the blocks of all the other colours in place. Then you can go back and add detail. So, for example, I want to put the grass here. You can then do its reflection below. And if you do the reflection of a bit of grass, just as a point, here we are, let's put a bit of grass there standing up. The reflection of that blade of grass would not be green, it would be probably a brown colour like a raw sienna or a burnt sienna. You won't see the bright colours of grass reflecting in this instance. And if this is too bright, by the way, as water, you can always neutralise it slightly, again using a touch of a grey. So I've got a sort of middle grey here, so if I'm finding that's a little bit too vibrant a colour for the puddles, very simple, just tone it down. Or another trick is to use charcoal, and charcoal is less black than black pastel. So looking for my bit of charcoal, I think I've got a bit in here. Here we go. That's charcoal. So this is another way. If you want to just grey it down, a little rough side strokes of charcoal. It still retains the colour. It just knocks it back a bit. But if you put black pastel on that, it would kill it. So tiny bits of charcoal are very useful. Addition of charcoal if you just want to tone something, and it's also very useful, by the way, for putting in little sort of shadows in the mud and in the landscape. You can do little sort of broken strokes of charcoal. So what I want to do though is put in. We have got a tree here, but we've got in this picture we've got a birch tree. So what I was going to do is show you how the birch tree in here would reflect down there. Before I do that, I'm going to put a little bit of landscape in here, and maybe you will have a darker tree behind. And again, if you've got dark trees against the sky, charcoal to start with, and then if you put greens on top of that, so here's a deep green, it's a bit too viridian, so I might have to adjust that. But it will make the green much more realistic by putting a dark base down and then putting greens on top. If the greens are a little bit too emeraldy like that, we can put some brown in them, because complementary colour to green is red. You could put red, but that might jump out at you a bit. So if you put in a reddish brown, you'll find, here's a good example. So this is probably, I think it's a burnt sienna sort of colour. It's probably the same colour actually as the paper almost. If you add a bit of that to your green, let's go again. If it goes too red, you can just put the green in it together. It just greys the green. And if you go back to the green here, that's got a little bit more green in it, so let's just put that in. You can try mixing greens, but for doing these really dark greens, sometimes having a green is is a good way to do it. If you want to mix a green, one of the, particularly if you're putting more bright greens in, use a phthalo blue, which this is, which is basically a coal blue. I'll just show you over here. So it's a turquoise blue, and if we add any yellow to that, so if I just take a deeper yellow and add it to that, look at that lovely green I now get. So that's using, it's not even a cadmium yellow, it's probably a yellow ochre. So yellow ochre and some phthalo blue, and you can get some very nice touches of green. With pastels, you have to do a lot of picking up different colours and experimenting to see. So let's put some of that in here as well. That's giving us a bit of a lift. So it doesn't want to be bright. So if I wanted to get a really bright green and I didn't have that nice pale apple green, I could do the same thing here for grass by putting a phthalo blue down, or even a cerulean blue, and adding a bright yellow to it. So this is like a lemon yellow, and again, you get a lovely. Oh, it's a bit too chalky, not quite. That's a bit too light a yellow, so maybe a deeper yellow. That's better. Would give me a more grass-like or moss-like, I think. Who knows? So that's another recipe. If you don't have that green, you can see I've got a very similar result using the Prussian blue. And I think it's probably not a cadmium yellow, but it's a warm yellow as opposed to the lemon I used in the first instance, which was too pale. It was too chalky a result. So that is a good way to create that green. But to create the illusion of water, the best thing you can do is put reflections in it. So there we've got the sky reflecting generally. Let's just have a slight clean up. I recommend baby wipes at this stage. I haven't got any myself, but I think we've got some wipes in the kitchen. So let's put a tree in, and I'm going to start, because we've got a birch tree here, I'm going to start by putting it in with the dark bits using the charcoal, and then we'll put the silver bits on top. So let's put a tree down. Let's go back to this one. Let's take that tree as a good example. So we're going to put it down here, so I've got plenty of space for it to reflect. It's going to go in here, and it'll go up into the sky here. Okay, so when it goes down here, what we've got to do is look very carefully at where I bend it. There's a branch that comes out there. I've got to echo the same shapes down there as above. So now if I add a little bit of light onto this birch tree, actually the white's too white, let's use that pale grey. We can always add some white to it. And the reason I've got this nice dark tree behind is it will show up the pale colours. Because when it comes to the sky, if you look at a white birch tree against the sky, it will not look white anymore, it will look dark. So I wanted to show up a bit of light down here. And again, this light won't really appear in the reflection. You lose contrast, so you can really either go down to a different shade of grey or even into sienna. So that's the trunk, and I've put a little bit more brightness on here. Let's just say there is a bit of sunlight catching the edge of this.
Is it different when you use oil pastels?
Well, oil pastels, yeah, you still want to, well, oil pastels don't mix as much, so you have to be very selective in your colours. If you've got really good squidgy oil pastels, so you can get these wash effects, you really need to use pressure and a good strong surface. And if you can get them graduating, really good oil pastels.
You can usually mix two, but not three.
I think that's good advice. Yes, try and get two colours that work together. Sometimes, if you put two colours together, you may need to add for example, a pale grey or a white to soften them. But the more colours, the more pastels you put on, the more difficult it gets, unless you use a solvent like Terps or white spirit. Or Sensador on a brush or on your finger, or even on the pastels to merge them. So it's a tricky thing to get perfect. Anyway, let's put a bit more detail in his trees. Try and get it to show up. And what we'll see is often, as I say, a browny colour reflecting rather than the white down here. So when we now so I'll just put some thinner branches on here. I'm using a brown now just to put in a bit of branch work. But the key thing is we're going to put some leaves on the tree. So if we put some leaves on the tree, we need to use a green that is not too sharp, even with birch trees, but it needs to show up dark against the sky. And this is where, again, actually I've just lost, there's my bit of charcoal. Let's just see what happens. If I put charcoal on first, I'm just putting in little blocks of colour, little sort of smudgy bits of colour. So then I put the green on top. That way we get the foliage showing up against the bright colours in the sky. So let's put some green on top. The other thing is I had this cloud down here, but of course I wouldn't see much of that reflecting because it's not wet here, but I might see a hint of it there at that point, so I could put a bit of cloud in there as well. Spot that. So whatever we put up here in terms of foliage, so let's put some dark, so we've got to do the same down here. So will it reflect? No, that won't reflect, but that one would. And it's sometimes worth getting either a stump or a pencil and working out, going down to where the water stops, or would stop here, looking at the height of that branch, and going down to check you're getting the right depth. So you notice that I'm reflecting this one, and it's going down there. So I'm trying to line things up so they're in line, but also at the correct height for the reflection. And then if you start connecting up those bits of foliage with the same branches. If you're not sure, sometimes it helps just to turn your picture sideways to see if the reflection is lining up. It's just the way we see. It's sometimes easier to look at it that way than turn it back again. Or even to look at it upside down and think, is this tree the correct tree for what's, as a reflection? So it should look as convincing when you turn it round as this way up. So test it like that. It's rather like doing a portrait. An old tip for checking whether a portrait's looking right is to actually hold the painting you're doing through a mirror. And sometimes you will see glaring errors will suddenly jump out at you, whereas you couldn't see them before. The mirror will show you. And it's the same with artwork, actually. You can even show this to a mirror and think, is it balanced or is it working well? But that won't reflect. So let's have a bit up here. Dark a bit. No, that won't reflect, you see. So we don't actually have to do too much reflection to get the water looking reflective. And what I'm doing now, just going back to my original colour in the water, just to sharpen up where my reflection is taking place. See if that will do it. Now, if there's a bit of a breeze, by the way, you might get a little bit of a blur. So, for example, if I just put a shrub over here, there's a dark shrub here by the side of this little track, then what you may get is a slightly wiggly reflection like that. So it's not quite the same, it's not a solid shape. And just putting a few strips of light going through the reflection sometimes will make it look more watery. Don't overdo that because it depends on the surface. I mean, this I've done as a slightly still track, but here, as I say, if there's a bit of a breeze, you might get a little bit of distortion in your tree, and you can always also take your stump and just push the branches or the trunk into the paper more and get it to look either more solid or more distorted. And again, the stump here, I can go into the trunk and get it to show up better by pushing the pastel into the surface. Sometimes when you've got 2 or 3 layers of pastel on and you go on top, it's quite, you get quite a dirty result. You need to clean it up a bit. And so the stump will push the shapes together. And again, here I can go into this tree behind and go a bit darker here. And exploit the theory of counterchange, which is about placing light things against dark things and vice versa. There's another branch over here. So you don't have to rub out a hole to put the branch in. Even with layers of pastel, you just have to press a bit harder And that's where using slightly harder pastels or charcoal is a very good way of doing that. So let's just go down into the reflections here and tidy them up. So I need to do a little bit of work tidying up, but the principle is to relate the colours in the reflections to what's above. So the sky is related, to relate the object to what's above, and then also to refine it. So now, if I was going to carry on with this painting, I'd sit carefully and I'd look at each stage and make sure that particularly the tree, that the shapes are lining up correctly. And another little trick is if you've got a little hand mirror, sometimes you actually put a hand mirror up to your painting and look down into the mirror to see what it would look like if there was a puddle beneath the tree. So you can hold it beneath your tree and make a pretend puddle, then take the mirror away and paint what you've seen in the mirror. It does work. So just a little, square mirror is best because you can butt it right up to the edge. But it's a simple trick just to relate your subject here to the reflection. So I won't do any more. You can do more in your work in a minute. But the detail is what I would now put in. So I'd now build up the textures in this foreground. I'd now connect the edges where necessary. I'd make sure the colours were clean. I go back to this sky. That's not perfect up here. I need to, complete that. But I go through it and make sure at every stage that I've got the right results. But just a final word, if you're going to fix a painting like this, if I sprayed, I've got some fixative here, but if I sprayed it on that, it would go darker in colour as it goes wet. It would then dry, but you might find you lose the brightest colours when you fix. So if I go back to the examples that I did in my book, which is where, I'll put it over here. If I go back to this one, just as an example, I did fix this, but now you will go back, the lights are sometimes just lost. So if I go back to these clouds, if I now put white on, you'll see, look, it looks much brighter. And that's what happens. Fixative does dull, particularly the light, bright colours. And so as a tip, if you have to fix because it's a bit fragile, that's all very well, but be prepared to go back at the end and just enhance those. And you can't fix, if you fix again, the same thing will happen, that colour will sink. So the brightest lights sometimes have to be added on with no fixative, and that's why it's very important with pastels to protect them and put them, either under glass, in which case they'll be safe, in a frame, or put layout paper on top of a pastel, put it in a drawer, and then put layout paper between each pastel, and that keep them perfectly. But ultimately, they will last for about 500,000 years if you've done them on a cave wall. So that's the other way to do it, is to buy a cave and paint pastels on the wall. You could do things like animals running around, things like that. That'd be good, wouldn't it?
Wild boars and things.
Exactly.
You're optimistic.
No, the more they discover, the ancient cave art, I think they've discovered some out in the Far East, in the Philippines, is it, or in Australasia, where they've got examples which are much older than any of the ones they've found so far in Spain and France. So, we're talking about 50,000 years plus. I think they've now pushed that. I think that's what they've always thought. I think they've now pushed that back to 250,000 years ago. That's some earliest. They've even found Neanderthal cave art, which they can prove from the bones that have been found in the cave and so on, which is just amazing, which shows that the Neanderthal man was just as imaginative and creative, had the same desire to paint. So pastels, effectively, are as old as those bits of cave art. The only difference is I'm not using any blood for the browns. I'm just using iron oxide. But that's, they'd have used that too, sort of the earth, the charcoal from the fire. Sorry, Steve? Iron oxide, there you go. Anyway, so pastels, the oldest medium known to man.